Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. Our show is being live streamed right now at YouTube and Facebook. So just go to the Ancient Faith Ministries pages. You can watch live right now and join in the conversation in the live comments. Another way to connect with us during the show right now or anytime is to send us a text message to 412-206-5012. That's 412-206-5012. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And of course, this is a call-in show, so if you'd like to call in, you can give us a call at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. So let's get started. Once again, we are going to have a conversation that is somewhat of an adult nature. We're not going to get into any intimate issues. However, it may be wise for parents to set the children aside, to not necessarily listen to this conversation. However, parents, this is really important. Parents and grandparents, we want you to listen carefully to this particular show tonight, because we are going to talk about having crucial conversations with your children. As I was saying in the transfer from Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne's show, this particular issue that we've talked about before with our guest is really very important. The issue of pornography and its easy access. And it's not just adults and it's not just adult men that really have this issue. However, because the access to the internet, the access to smartphones and so forth is so prevalent, our children are absolutely, we know from a statistical standpoint, that children are accessing pornography at a very high rate. Even in 2018, as we said previously, which is already 6 years ago, 51% of males and 32% of female students viewed pornography before their teenage years. And at that time, the first exposure to pornography online, on average, was 12 years old. Today, it's much earlier. And what it's causing is a distortion in the minds of our children. We have a prevalence, which is unfortunately celebrated even in this month of sexual deviation. And we have to get a handle on this, especially those who are parents, grandparents, caregivers, that we take back the minds of our young children, that we're able to mold them, that we're able to guide them, and that we are able to protect them. We can't necessarily protect them from everything in the world, but there are some proactive things that we can do. However, once that line has been crossed, once that threshold has been crossed, what do we do as parents? What do we do when our young child, who is 9, 10, 11, 12, or older, is not only maybe accessing or has accidentally seen pornography, but is possibly even becoming addicted to the viewing of pornography? So tonight, we'd like to welcome back Matthew Riley. Matthew Riley is an Orthodox Christian, formerly a Free Methodist pastor. He and his family attend St. Peter and Paul Church in Crossingville. He serves as an ambassador for OCMC, but also he is a worker in the industry that helps people break free from the addiction to pornography, an organization called Be Broken. We will talk about that in a little bit, but tonight we'd like to welcome Matthew back. Matthew, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. Father Tom, it's great to be on your show again. One of these times we'll have to be on a show where you don't have to give a disclaimer at the beginning. Hey, your kids might not want to be in
Right.
the room for this one,
We'll talk.
but it's
We'll
it's
talk
it's the
about
nature of
football or
what we
something.
do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is important. This is important, and I know that you take this very, very seriously.
Yeah,
But it's unfortunate that we even have to have these conversations, right? Who
yeah,
would have
absolutely.
thought that even let's say 15 years ago, and I've talked about this many, many times before, that the internet, has this tremendous promise. The internet has the promise of bringing a lot of knowledge, bringing people together, but often that promise has fallen short because of the dangers involved, right? So we're not just getting the good information; we're getting all of the filth also. So
Yeah,
it's kind of I've often said, if we give children unfettered access to the internet, what we're doing is we basically have a sewer pipe basically connected to their minds, right? And their hearts. And so this is very, very difficult. So before we get into the discussion, and I know you have some slides that we're going to share in a few minutes, why is this important? Why is it important to be able to prepare to have difficult, critical, crucial conversations with children?
yeah. Because of the reality of the culture we live in. Unfortunately, uh, you know, the prevalence of children getting a hold of pornography, being presented with it, and not just pornography. We're also talking objectification, sexual jokes, all that is just incredibly high. You were mentioning some studies. Most recent studies would say about the average age of first exposure for a boy to pornography is 10. And there's some
Wow.
suggestions that through the COVID years, it probably got even earlier, even is to 8 possibly. Girls aren't that far behind, and actually the number of girls who start getting hooked on pornography has been continuing to increase. So it's a real problem, but it's one that really I think as the church we can use for God's glory. That we can actually approach this in a way that actually equips our children for their lives in Christ and walking with Christ.
Yeah, and this is very helpful also that you are outlining this. Priests in parishes, you know, often you feel like you are a jack of all trades but master of none, right? Like you have to know a little bit about everything, but it's impossible to be a specialist in one particular area. And this is one of those things where often when a situation happens in a family, and I've had this happen before, right? Where someone comes to me and says exactly this. My son has, viewed this stuff, or I found out that he's texting a girl and they're exchanging pictures or they're exchanging, inappropriate messages. What do I do? Well, you know, I I don't know. I mean,
Right.
there's this isn't something that you are necessarily prepared for. So it's really important that you are presenting to us proven Christian, Orthodox strategies to be able to say this is one way. This is a smart way to approach this because it could go south very quickly, right?
Yeah.
You could lash out at the child, right? And there's already probably, I would assume, a lot of shame involved, right?
Hmm.
They know something's wrong, but they don't have the wherewithal to be able to stop that. So approaching the child in the correct way, to have an honest discussion, and as I'm sure, this sort of overused phrase, but it's very important, a teachable moment to say,
Right.
this is what it is to be an Orthodox Christian. This is how you have to navigate this. Unfortunately, this is something that usually only adults have to deal with. And it's unfortunate that you are so young. And, here's how we're going to get through this together. So, Matthew, let's start from the beginning, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And so, Simon, thank you very much. If you could, are we going to go ahead and bring up the first slide? Matthew, would you like us to do that?
Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to see him, so I think Simon will just get to go for the ride here.
Okay, I'm also monitoring it on YouTube. So Simon, go ahead and bring up the first slide, and then walk us through what we're going to encounter here. All right?
Yeah. So just kind of let you a little bit know about the ministry, Be Broken Ministries. We're actually in our 21st year. And so the idea behind the name Be Broken isn't, an idea of just glorifying sin or saying, oh, well, right? It's the idea of we approach God in humility for the healing that we need. And so Be Broken helps men with unwanted sexual behavior, wives dealing with betrayal trauma. We do training with churches and pastors and priests, right? So if you are someone who wants to say, hey, I know I need to deal with these in my church, we can certainly do that. We also can come and do presentations at different parts of the country. But what we want to focus on tonight is really parenting and how to help kids. And so we're going to look at what I call critical conversations. That's based off the book Honest Talk by John Fort, who's one of our staff members here at Be Broken. These are, we're going to kind of walk through some different ages, some different conversations that you're going to want to have throughout those ages. And the thing is, I'm not here as an expert. I'm a parent, right? I have my oldest just turned 17. My youngest is about ready to turn, I'm going to get this wrong. No, 12. And so, and we have 4 kids, and I'm still learning how to do this as well. And unfortunately, I actually use a lot of Be Broken's resources to do this. As a guy who myself was caught in pornography for 25 years, I know the struggle. I know the reality of it. And so I want to help my kids do that. And it's never too late to start, right? I started way later with my kids than we would even recommend it Be Broken. And yet I've seen so much fruit from doing this. So when we talk, when we are planning to talk to our kids about sexuality, usually I think our concern is that our kids are going to be grossed out, and they're going to be afraid, and we're going to, stumble over words, and we're not going to be sure what to do. And so I want to help that not happen. So we had taken a poll in 2018 about parents' fears, right? About what do we fear when we come into this topic? And we fear that it might strain our relationship. We fear it will ruin our kids' innocence. We fear that my kids might find out my past, or it'll be too much work. And these are all legitimate fears, right? And so I want to address these as we go through to see how, they're legitimate fears, but they're fears that we do need to work through so we can help our kids. We also had done a survey of 30 teenagers in Christian families, and we actually told them just to write answers. We didn't even give them multiple choice. And we said, what do you fear when you come into these conversations? And all 30 kids said one or both of the two and no other options. They said that parents won't understand how I feel, and I'll get in trouble for what I say or ask. Interestingly, none of them said I'll get in trouble for what I did, just simply asking. So those are the fears that kids tend to come with, and so we want to be able to meet them in that. And so the questions we start out is who or what is shaping our children's sexuality? And we see this, everywhere. Google, video games, Netflix, YouTube, sexual jokes, friends, apps. The list goes on and on and on. And so we have these big companies that billions of dollars of industry that are designed to hook our kids on pornography. But we also have friends who just show their other friends, right? And that's nothing new. What's new is the internet that makes it so much easier when you have, used to be your dad's Playboys, right, is what we would call it. Well, now you have that on your phone, right? And worse than that. So, it's everywhere. And so one thing to think about as parents is, what were things that influenced your sexuality and how you thought about sex as a child? Right, that's a great place to start kind of reflecting on your own journey. Maybe you had a good one. Maybe you had parents that really helped you out. And most often, I think we don't. Probably a lot of people don't have that experience. And so as we consider that, we go forward in this conversation. So we're going to talk about 6 critical conversations that we need to have with our children. feelings and emotions, God's design for sex, preparing for exposure, dealing with temptation, processing exposure, and leveraging your story. Right, we're going to run through these. It's going to be kind of fast, but I do encourage people, email me, Matthew@bebroken.org, Matthew@bebroken.org. We can help you, right? Like, this is going to be a kind of a dump on you guys, but then, obviously this will be something that, let's start the conversation, so we can train you as parents and help you, or as churches, that we can come and help your church. So our goals for our time really is what's going to be the next best step for your child, right? Or if you're a priest, for your church. What are the best conversations to start with? What resources are going to help the most? So the first conversation we have with our kids, and again, these are ongoing conversations, right? There's an order to them of how, which ones you want to start with, but this is an ongoing cycle. And that's why we have some good resources that help with that. But the first is feelings and emotions, right? We want to start there in talking with our kids, right? Because this is a training ground for talking about sexuality. Right? Emotions are personal. They get your child used to talking about personal things. And so it's a great preparation. So you don't want to start discussing sexuality with your kid until you have developed kind of that safe emotional space with them. And emotions and sexuality are intertwined. Right? The biggest way that sexuality becomes broken, the biggest way that sin can grasp our hearts and our lives and become misguided, because a child doesn't know what to do with big emotions, right? And we see that in our own lives, right? We are more likely to act out of our flesh and act out of our sin when we're kind of, get a little bit confused with our emotions and we don't know what's going on. And so when you're talking with kids about emotions, there's some great ways to do it. Again, I don't want to kind of go too deep into these, but there's feeling faces for younger kids, right? These sheets that have pictures of faces, and you can use those to help kids understand what they're feeling or describe feelings. As children get older, you can use something that's called emotional care tags, where you have, when I blank, I am feeling blank, I need blank, right? And you start using these kind of things with middle children, so they can start realizing the connection between their feelings and their actions, and that there actually is an ability for them to control their actions within their feelings. We have this one slide, some examples. When I cry, I'm feeling disappointed, I need a hug, right? When I hit, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I need space, right? And so not only negative actions, but good actions too, that we need. Like crying, that's a good action, especially when it's tears of repentance, right? But what do you need in those moments? And so helping children to realize that. And that's something that, people can practice. When children get older, we can go into deeper emotions, deeper feelings, beyond the surprised, bad, fearful, angry, disgusted, sad, happy, right? That's kind of our base core emotions. But as kids get older, we can expand that out into hundreds of different emotion words, right? And it's not just to build up a vocabulary, but it's to build up our understanding of what's going on in us, right? Because as we understand what's going on in us, as we do that reflection, with the help of, for kids doing it with the help of their parents, it's going to help kids go forward in their behavior. Adolescent children, so as they get even older, there's something called an emotional care plan. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So that's the first basic conversation. Again, this is an ongoing topic of conversation that you have with kids at different stages at different ages. The next one is God's design for sex, right? And so conversations with sex, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew, I was just going to ask you a question here.
Sure.
And we want to remind our listeners that I know this is a sort of a presentation format, but you are welcome to ask questions in the chat. You're also welcome to call in if you have a question. One question that I have, it seems like the assumption that you are making, and I may have set this up wrong. So the assumption that you're making is these are conversations that you are planning to have. In other words, you're preemptively saying, look, let's talk about emotions. Let's talk about temptations. Let's talk about being uncomfortable. Let's talk about how to deal with disappointment or confusion. Is that correct?
Yes and no, right? So an ideal situation is we're ahead of the game, right? But there's those times where it doesn't happen, and what we've even found, we had so another ministry that does something similar to us. They told us this one story about this mom had reached out to them for help and said, "Hey, my daughter, thinks she's a lesbian." Was what the mother came to them, and she's like, how do I stop it, right? How do I do it? And so the advice was, and this was really good advice, was don't deal with that right now. We need to start from the beginning, right? And so even then, like, okay, we see the bad destructive behavior, but let's build that relationship. And so what the suggestion with that mom was, okay, let's start building that relationship. Let's start building that emotional connection. And as the mother did that with the daughter, started finding that she had gotten hooked into porn. And that was what was disturbing her mind and telling her what to do. And so it helped then the daughter start coming to that healing to be able to then, obviously change that behavior to what the mom wanted. But it's sometimes right. Yeah, you have to wait on addressing, the presenting problem and first go to the what's underneath. So yeah, so it's and be broken. Like we'll work with families at any step and help them from there.
That's a really, really good point. I appreciate you said that. In other words, it isn't always necessary to address immediately the destructive behavior because it's possible that you have not created the foundation of having this kind of conversation with your child. So until you get to that point, until you have laid some of the foundational principles, you have made those connections for them, they're not able to simply just address the issue. I think I'm a lesbian, or a girl, this is very big right now, right? Something like 20% is some ridiculous number, right? It's a trend. It's become a fad to say, I was born in the wrong body. So instead of simply saying, no, you're not, you are a boy or you are a girl, instead of just addressing it like that, you're saying that you have to make this, you have to broaden their understanding, and you have to broaden your relationship to be able to make that conversation more helpful instead of just accusatory or disciplinary.
Yeah, and right, that's hard as parents because we if we see our child doing something destructive, and trust me, I've seen my children doing something constructive. They were all 2 years old once, right? Like we want to stop it, right? Because we want to protect our kids, and that's a great thing. But sometimes we have to take a step back and do the process to help, because if we approach it right then, it may draw more of a wedge and actually work against what we're hoping it to do.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
Yeah, no, great question. So yeah, we'll kind of go back. And again, there's so much information here that I'm just kind of running through. This is a presentation I can do at churches. I did at our church at a parenting conference a couple months ago, I guess that was. And so these are going to be really just a start of conversations that I would love to have with listeners that can reach out. But so as we're going through this, right, the second kind of category of critical conversations is God's design for sex, right? It is important to have these conversations at age appropriate levels, right? And so we even have to ask ourselves, as a teenager, as a kid, how many of us learned what we know about sexuality from something other than our parents? Right. And whenever I ask this question in a group, that's a lot of people. We want to change that for the next generation. And so, it's important that we don't have to be ashamed of what God's created, right? He's created us good. He's created sex to be something wonderful in marriage. And it's, by talking about how God has designed something, it protects rather than ruins innocence. Again, there's age appropriate levels, and we have resources that kind of help suggest that. But we also, want to make sure that we're beating out the other stuff and helping protect them from that as well.
And I did want to ask that also because, this is probably the you know, parents all refer to it, always refer to it as the talk, right? Did you have the talk with your kids? But I think most parents, myself included, are woefully unprepared to have that conversation. Like, you don't really know what to say, right? You don't know how to approach that. So my question to you is, do you have resources? Do you have, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but a sort of, you know, a script that says it should go something like this, right? This is what the conversation, this is how you would say that. You have this?
Yep, we have a lot of this, and one of the things that's important is to also, as parents, we have to get out of our mind that we're just going to have the talk, as if it's just we sit down, we give them all the information, and poof, we're done, right? Which would be the easiest thing, but it's building that relationship. And so actually, one of the we have lots of research. We actually have a card game you can play with your kids that helps with emotional stuff, but also with sexuality. But probably our best resource is we have a 30-week curriculum called God's Design for Emotional Growth and Sexuality. And so this brings in a lot of our other resources, and it also brings in some resources from other sources as well, that really it has 4 different tracks for 4 different age groups, and it just leads you through. And it's designed for homeschoolers, but honestly, if you just stretch it out a little bit, like you spend 20 minutes a week with one of your kids, or if you have kids that they're the same age, you can clump some of them together. And so really it just walks you right through all of these conversations in a good order at good age levels. And that's what I use. Which, like, I'm here talking about parenting, right? I use our resources because I need that script. I need that help. And so, yeah, so that's something, again, at bebroken.org/store. You can find that as well.
Excellent. All right, let's continue.
So we're gonna, we'll jump ahead a little bit, just for time, because you're asking some great questions. So, obviously God's design for sexuality is important. And I think we get a lot of that actually in the Orthodox Church more than I used to in the Protestant world. I think just being able to talk about, like celibacy, to be able to talk about Mary, to be able to talk about the conception of Christ, like already there's this idea in even the Orthodox Church that we actually talk about sexuality, which I think is really awesome. So we'll kind of move forward to the next basic conversation, which I want to make sure I didn't skip too far ahead on my own stuff. The third one is preparing for exposure, right? So this is, again, hopefully we are doing this with our kids before they're exposed. But even if it's after, again, there's still going to be helpful things in these conversations. But we also want to move ourselves away from just thinking about pornography, right? There are predators out there. There is porn and sexualized media. I mean, a lot of the pop music kids are listening to today, if they're watching videos, clothes might be on, but that's not saying much. There's erotic literature, there's sexual jokes, there's objectification. These are all things that we want to help our kids be able to face when they do face them. And so, sooner is always better, right? The earlier you can work with the kids, you're better. But again, if you haven't started yet, it's never too late. If your kid's already been exposed, it's not like, oh, well, I can't do anything else, right? You can always start that to help them out. But the basic steps that you do end up teaching a kid to how to deal with exposure is 4 steps. Teach the kid, close your eyes, you get away, you come tell me, right? And you will not be in trouble. And so those are kind of the four things we want to teach kids, like, ultimately, if they're exposed to something like pornography or even sexual jokes or whatever, close your eyes, get away, come tell me, and you won't be in trouble. And those are kind of those really 4 important steps to do with that. And kind of with that is the next conversation, the dealing with temptation. That wraps in really well. And these are conversations you start having when your kid is old enough, or you start realizing, hey, wait a second, my kid's starting to have a crush on whoever, right? My kid's starting to show this. And one of the important things that we really Well, I guess the question we'll start off first is, and I'll ask you, Father Tom, did you ever do something as a kid that you later wondered, why did I do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we all, I mean, as an adult, I still do that, right? Like, why did I do that? And so one of the things, and this is important, to look at, to understand as parents, but also understand for teaching our kids is how our brains work, right? So, and we see this on this talk and on the slides right now. If you see it, we have a picture of a boy, but this is boy, girl. This is how our brains work. And so, what happens is if we're exposed to kind of some sexualized media, right? What happens is dopamine floods our brain, right? We become aroused, dopamine floods our brain, and there's sexual arousal. And what happens during sexual arousal is negative feelings vanish, right? Your body starts to totally focus on the arousal, and the negative feelings go away. And what's interesting is we don't necessarily always realize that. Kids definitely don't realize that. They just go, "Oh, wow, this is something exciting," while they're kind of, those negative feelings are going away. So what happens like later, right, in a person's life situation, something scary is going to happen, right? Maybe parents are fighting. Maybe they see a scary movie. Like there's always going to be something that, kind of startles you as a kid. And we can't stop that from happening. And what happens, right, is a kid's going to want to get away from that scary thing. Adults, we are going to want to get away from that scary thing. And what happens is our brain wants to protect us, right? God made our brains to want to protect us. Problem is, if our brains are not trained well, it's going to protect us in a bad way. And so what happens is if we're going through this difficult thing and we've already been exposed to pornography, our brain's going to say, hey, I know a great way to get away from that scary thing. And we start moving towards that porn, fantasy, masturbation, right? Sexual arousal, to get out of it. And a lot of times that's something that happens without even thinking through it, right? It's just kind of that Pavlov effect, right? And so our brain will protect us. It'll say, okay, let's move to this. We can get rid of the scary stuff and we'll be okay. I think I might have said in our interview a couple of months ago when we talked, like for me, porn was a best friend. It really was. It was a best friend that was trying to kill me, but it was this place that I could go to feel safe. I had to let go of that because it was doing more damage than it was helping. But that's how we get hooked into those cycles. And then we get into those cycles, right? So we have, a negative emotion that happens, and we start to feel discomfort when we have that negative emotion, and so we go into something to resolve that, and that could be again porn or masturbation, whatever, which then leads to shame, right? There's almost always that goes right to shame, which
Right.
creates more negative emotions, which goes to discomfort, and so on and so on. Eventually, the brain just wants to try to cut out the discomfort, and so the cycle just starts going. And we see that in addictions, and we see that really in a lot of our behaviors, where we turn to the wrong things. Now, hopefully, we're turning to the right things, right? That's our goal. That's what we want to do. We want to turn to the Lord in those times.
Right.
But as parents,
Matthew,
yeah.
can I just ask real quickly about that? So, you do hear often, if you think about men, and I'm glad that you said, pornography had become a friend, right? Had become something comfortable. It had, and I think a lot of men that struggle with it would say, well, it is, and again, this might be a little bit too much information, but often men will say, well, I had a very tense day and I needed something to relax, right?
Yep.
And so how do you, and I also like that you brought up about addiction, right? Because this is, even though the psychological community does not recognize this as an addiction, officially, right, it is an addiction. We know it's an addiction.
It fits all the parameters and definition of it, whether they want to admit it or not, right?
Absolutely. How helpful is it to talk to a child about addiction when they don't really understand what that is. Because obviously, porn isn't the only addiction that is out there.
Right.
There could also be drugs, right? Which is certainly extremely physically addiction. And we don't realize, I also like, some people might be put off. Some Orthodox people say, well, why aren't you talking about the fathers? And why aren't, well, I mean, we will get there in terms of the broader understanding of sexuality and so forth. But for children to understand, there is a physical component to this. Something is happening in your brain. There's a chemical, effect that it's having on your brain, and it becomes so pleasurable, you want to go do it again.
Right.
So how do you present that to a child that might not have the physiological understanding yet? Like, do you just kind of bring it down to the most basic elements and say,
yeah,
it may even make you feel good, but here's why ultimately you shouldn't do this?
Yep, and that's going to depend on different ages as well. And so one of the things, actually, for anyone who emails me, I can give you, a list of books for different ages. One of the earliest books we suggest, and I can't remember the name offhand, but it's basically a book that talks about, but I want it, right? Like a kid who won't share or takes toys from someone else because they want it. Well, that's already starting that mindset that, as Christians, we want to turn from. Right, we want to not have that selfishness. So it's going to depend on different ages. The model I just kind of ran through. Usually, you can start around 10 or so, going up, where they can start understanding some of those deeper concepts. But there's even ways to do that when they're younger.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. And so I know we're also cutting on time, so I want to make sure we go through this a little bit, but one of the things we get to what we call core emotional triggers, is those really strong emotions that can lead us into sinful behavior, and it all comes down to fear, right? And Scripture says constantly about fear, right? Like, fear the Lord, not these things. And so it's how do we move away from those? The fifth main conversation is processing exposure, right? And this is where you actually you really hit the nail on the head earlier about, we don't want to approach our kids with anger, with yelling. Good news is, if we've already done that, we can apologize to our kids, right? And come back from that and right, work on that. But that anger response is our own fear. It's our own sin. It's a lot of times our own feelings of, oh wow, I did not protect my kid. And so again, we want to work through those, but also to help our kid, because the truth is, our kids are not monsters. They're targets. They're targets of this world. They're targets of, Pride Month. They're targets of what's going on in some of our schools. And so we want to protect our children from being exposed, but we also want to help them after they're exposed, because unfortunately we know it's most likely going to happen.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
And it's never too late. And I do appreciate, obviously, bringing up the fathers, right? Like, we don't want to go into this and be like, well, let's go with modern counseling. Modern counseling can actually be pretty destructive. But but one of the things that we talk about is, when you're with your kids, talking with your kids is so important, right? Not lecturing them, but talking to them, asking them questions, engaging in dialogue. And we like to use the comparison, like you take a bath to clean the outside, talking helps clean, the inside. And the thing about that is, we look at that and say, well, what about what the church has, right? What about the Eucharist? What about confession? What about the mysteries and the means of grace that God has given us? Those are powerful. But in all of those, and this is where we can bring in the fathers, in all of those, you don't just go and take the Eucharist, right? You don't just go up into confession and say, okay, I did a few things bad here, just absolve me, right? That's not Orthodox confession. It's look in your heart, look in your life, take time to examine before you go through these things.
Yeah.
St. John the
Can
Latter
I?
talks about, yeah,
I'm sorry. You were just about to say. I just want to say one thing because I think many priests will identify with this particular problem, but I have had the situation where a child does something wrong. It may not be this, it may be something else. He may, or she may have stolen something or talked back to the parent or whatever it was. I've actually had them say, I'm taking you to Father Tom and, you're going to have to go to confession, as if it's like this, they're being punished.
right.
Right? And
Right.
all of a sudden, the kid is crying and he's there and it's like, my mom said I have to. Like, that is not the way to approach confession. And I love that you said this is about cleansing. This is about, repenting and acknowledging, but also renewal. And, it's not punitive. And so let's
Exactly.
never use the sacrament of confession as a kind of, as parents, as a punitive measure against our children, threatening them with confession. Confession, especially, each parish starts a little bit differently, but usually for me, it's about 8 years old, second grade, something like that. It should be something that they desire to do. And we have to approach it like that. So if the parent understands it like that, as this healing process, as this therapeutic, that is from a Christian standpoint, a therapeutic process where we are being healed, that's the healthy way to bring in the idea of confession, of the sacraments, of reading good literature, the scriptures, the fathers together with them, and not simply as a punitive measure.
Right. It's Western theology that kind of basically has made confession into this punitive, you just have to get your stuff out and boom, you're good, right? Like we understand in Orthodox Church the healing nature of confession, the healing nature of the Eucharist, right? And so when we talk to our kids, right, when we're doing these conversations with our kids, the whole pattern that we're teaching them, what we're helping them to do is evaluate their hearts, to be able to bring up the junk in their hearts. So yeah, they can go to confession and that be healed. They can go to Eucharist, right? So it's not that these are like, okay, some counseling tricks that we do and these are going to make you all better. No, these are going to help open your heart so you can bring these before the Lord, right? And Saint John the Latter talks about, I forget which wrong, but he's talking about fasting, right? He says, well, fasting without humility is nothing, right? And so often we just want to do the things, but we actually have to prepare the heart. We have to actually bring the heart into it. And what we teach at Be Broken really helps lay out some ways to do that, some practical ways to do that, right? And now Be Broken is I'm the only Orthodox on staff, right? It's all Protestants, others, but they have done such a good job at not making it so, one area, but they do this kind of core base of like, here's the things that you need, and we can bring those into the Orthodox tradition as saying, like, yeah, these are things that fit exactly with what the fathers were saying, and here's just some practical ways to do it. So then we can help our kids so that they can go into healing.
Excellent. All right.
Yep.
So let's move forward.
Yep. So we'll hit on a few more things. One thing I mentioned about a judgment-free zone, right? Because I said, the fourth thing is when you tell your kid if they're exposed, the fourth thing is you won't get in trouble, right? And that's got to be an important line. And we look at that and we say, but if they did it wrong, like if they did it wrong, they need to be punished. Well, again, that's kind of like what you were talking about with, parents just kind of throwing the kids to the priest for confession, right? We want to help our kids. And so I'm not saying there's not a time for punishment, right? But what I'm saying is if a kid's exposed to pornography, even if the kid is looking at pornography, if we go straight to punishment, what we find is that the kid's going to go deeper and deeper into it because it plays on the shame. It plays on the emotional stuff that's going on. If we want to help our kids actually get past it, we have to help them with that, and we have to get our hands dirty in there. So that's why that's so important, because remember, kids fear that they're going to get in trouble for what they say or ask, not even what they do. So we want to help them, and obviously there can be consequences, right? And there's a difference between consequence and punishment, and we don't have time to get into that. But we want to make sure we're helping our kids, not just try to, on the surface, cut out the bad behavior. We want to help our kids heal. We want to be able to bring them to confession in such a way that it is a healing process, right? To the Eucharist, to fasting, to spiritual reading, where they're ready to actually give up the junk in them and receive the Spirit. So such an important part. The last basic conversation, again, these are ongoing conversations, is leveraging your story. And parents are afraid, right, that kids are going to find out their past. But kids are afraid that parents won't understand how they feel. So when kids start to know our past, again, we don't have to share all of the ugly details. We become people that they can connect more with, right? Basic rules that we set up with that is, one, if you're still caught up in porn and haven't begun working on it, you're not ready to talk to your kids yet, right? Reach out to me. We'll help you out. 2, don't tell your kid things that you haven't told your spouse yet, right? That your spousal relationships gotta be that baseline. 3, don't give inappropriate details. And the 4th step, we say, if their eyes get big and their mouth goes wide open, stop talking, because you probably just shared too many inappropriate details, right?
Yeah, right.
But your kid needs to know, like, you're a real person, right? And that's why we have the saints, right? Like, we look at the saints, and these are people like Saint Mary of Egypt, who I have back. I have Saint Mary. I have Saint Moses, the Ethiopian. I have Saint Fotini and King David. Here's people who we know the messed up parts of their lives, and it's because we know those, we can be encouraged as we see what God did in their lives, right? And we can be that for our kids as well. Now, I'm not as awesome as Saint Moses, who is my patron saint, but I can live out what Christ has done in me for my kids at the level it is. And so that's kind of those 6 main conversations. There's a few resources I do just want to highlight kind of near the bottom of the slideshow. The one is the Wise Phone. This is a separate company. This is not associated with Be Broken, but we do have a relationship with them. It's a smartphone that they actually put their own operating system on, so it actually is, you can't get around it. You can't like with iPhone, like, a kid can figure out how to get around what you put on it, like to protect them. Like, if they really want to. This phone they can't, so something you might want to check out. The next thing is we have conversations for integrity with kids. I can send you, so if you want this is basically just a sheet that has resources at different ages that can help you out with having some of these conversations. Just shoot me an email, matthew@bebroken.org. I can send that to you. Second to last slide is just some of the resources we do have at Be Broken. We do have online courses. We have a Just Between Us journal that parents and kids can write back and forth to each other. We have Honest Talk book. We have Honest Talk the game. But that God's Design for Emotional Growth and Sexuality, which I also have right here with me, that's been a game changer for us. I've had such amazing conversations with our kids. I've gone deeper with our kids. As parents, we like to think that our kids can come and talk to us about anything. And I used to think that too, and I had, unfortunately, some very disturbing things that happened where I realized, no, I wasn't the safe person I thought I was, and they were hiding stuff from me that they needed their dad. This kind of resource, these kind of conversations help us become those parents that our kids really can come talk to us about sexuality. They can come talk to us about problems, and we can help walk them through it. And that's just so important, right? And that's what we encourage. That's what we do at Be Broken with the family care, is help you build your relationship with your kid, so that you are the one they go to. You're the one that can help them. And if you don't know the answers, that's okay. We're going to help you with that. And it's great for your kids to know that you're not this, like, all-seeing, all-knowing person either. And then the last slide, if Simon can just put that on, that's again my email address, matthew@bebroken.org, and the online store if you want to get God's Design for Emotional Growth and Sexuality or any of the other resources, bebroken.org/store. And again, reach out to me, like ask questions. Our format, I've had a lot of information to throw at us tonight.
Of course.
But, we're here to walk with parents. We're not just going to dump resources on you or dump thoughts on you, but like we're here to walk with you. That is how we are designed as a ministry, to be there with you.
I appreciate that very, very much. And these are really valuable resources. I was thinking during your presentation, there has been a sea change in parenting throughout various generations. And often I think, we were talking about how June has become a corrupted month, right? And they are celebrating it in schools. We have parents who will say things like, and I'm not talking about Orthodox parents, God forbid, but parents in general who will say, well, I will allow my child to determine what gender they are, right, when they are ready. This is literal insanity, right? This is a kind of mental illness that has crept into what should be a very obvious matter. And at the root of it, I believe, is a kind of permissive parenting, which was a reaction against an overbearing parenting, right? So in earlier generations, and certainly even like St. Paul talks about it, he says, don't be too harsh with your children. Don't wear them out, he literally says, right? So you can actually be too harsh with your children. You can make them bitter. You can make them fearful. There's a lack of trust, and this is not good. And that, was common even in our times. However, in reaction to that, there was the opposite, and it was permissive parenting who basically said, what do you I always say, like, people will say, well, how can you give children communion, right? They don't understand what it is. And I say, do you ask your kids, do you want to eat today, Johnny? Do you want to wear clothes? Do you want to, like, you do good things for them, right? You model good behavior. You give them what they need. And if you have few rules, if you have few standards of behavior, it used to be some parents would say, well, I don't care if my kid does drugs as long as he does it in my house. Or I don't care if my kid has sex with another girl or whatever, but as long as they do it in my house. This kind of permissive parenting has been extremely destructive on children. And the reason why is they lack the emotional maturity, the emotional understanding to be able to handle these things, right? They usually have very poor problem-solving skills, poor decision-making skills, because we've not made any demands on our children at all. And by demands, I simply mean standards. I don't mean, you have to always do exactly what I say. I mean, there has to be a time when you are giving your children the opportunity to make mistakes, to make their own decisions, and so forth. We don't want to be overbearing and micromanaging our children, nor do we want to allow our children to kind of develop on their own without any Christian foundation, moral guidelines, guidelines for behavior. And I think this permissive parenting has really destroyed even a generation.
Absolutely, right. And it was a good not a good response, but I understand the response because there were some parenting styles that were so strict, right? So rigid, like kids should be seen but not heard if even seen, right? Like that was not healthy for kids either. We swung the other way and there. I think most parents really do mean the best for their kids. They want to help their kids. I think these are some powerful ways to do it that fits really in line with what the church teaches about children and how to raise children.
We have,
and yeah,
Matthew, we have a question that came in from Christopher. He says, how do you teach a teen girl modesty? She is super influenced by worldly images of cute, immodest clothing. Is there a YouTube of godly young Orthodox women that could be a role model? So at the root of it is, how do you teach a teen girl modesty?
Yep. Yeah, and that it, again, not without it was Christopher, right? Without knowing Christopher, your whole relationship with your daughter. That might start with not addressing that right now, but it could start with building a relationship with your daughter right now, and then starting to bring into, because if you can build that relationship where you can build that trust, where you can ask her in a way that she'll actually want to respond of, why do you want to dress that way, right? Like if you haven't put in that legwork to build that relationship, and you ask her that and she doesn't want to talk to you, that's not going to help, right? So there could be that, and it's hard to know without knowing. And Christopher, I would encourage you just to kind of email. We could kind of go a little bit deeper and have that conversation. But really, it all starts with that relationship you have with your child, and then finding those people, and we have that in the saints, right? Like we have those, the true womanhood that we see in the saints. We have true manhood that we see in the saints, and kids might, it might not be where kids want to look, but that is ultimately where we want to help them look. So email me. Let's talk some more. I would say, kind of, so I know your situation a little bit more. But we also do have a full-time family care director, as well as our director of training, who also both work directly with parents, do consultations, help with these things. So even if questions that I might not, have the best resources or answers for, I have others who are far deeper into this than I am, even with my 4 kids.
Great. Thank you very much. Christopher, I put Matthew's email address there in the chat for you. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
And Victor asks, how do you teach a young boy discipline and how to make good decisions?
Yeah. Again, I would say, without trying to sound too much like a salesman, get God's design for emotional growth and sexuality, because you're gonna start laying some of those foundations, right? Because again, it's so easy when we think about someone just talking with kids about emotions. Like we can go to this extreme where it's like, well, how do you feel, and not even like approaching the behavior, right? Like just, as long as you know what you feel. No, like the feelings, we're using those feelings to help our children then know how to make good choices and behaviors off of those feelings, right? And so that is a process. It's a process, I would say, that our curriculum does help you build with your child, because then you can start bringing in some of those like behavioral things with that. And so again, you're dealing with the core to help with the behaviors.
Yeah, very good. All right, so Victor, check that out. At bebroken.org/store. Yep. There's resources.
And Victor, feel free to email me as well as
reach out to Matthew at bebroken.org. All right, Matthew Riley, always very, very informative, very practical. Appreciate it very much. I wanted to ask you, how did your parenting seminar go at the church?
It was great. It was a great day, very well received. I think we had a few different speakers. And I think it really helped to sharpen and guide some of the parents, in all different areas of parenting. And it was so much fun. I don't know if we'll probably do it again, but like I said, I can also come and speak at a church, at a parish. I can do on men's topics. I could do for parenting topics. So feel free to reach out to me. We do have people all around the country who can do presentations as well. So.
Excellent. Very, very good. Matthew Riley, thank you very much. Keep up the great work. All right. Hope to have you back sometime, and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, again, very important topic. We talked about so many things, but the idea here is, and there are no quick fixes. I think if we've learned anything tonight from Matthew, you have to lay this foundation. This is, we have to create these relationships with our children so that when the time comes, we can have these conversations. But it's not something that, there aren't quick words that can fix a problem. It is about the atmosphere that we create with our children. It's about the expectations and the way that we approach these particular issues with them. So there are a lot of resources, obviously, creating in the home an atmosphere of trust, an atmosphere of growth, right? An atmosphere of openness so that they can come to you as parents, as caretakers, as grandparents, when there is a problem so that you can address these particular issues in a very Christian Orthodox way, because the world is not looking out for our children. The world is looking to corrupt our children. This is what they want. This is what the evil one wants. And so we have to be very, very careful to guide our children to understand what is good and what is right and what is holy. So again, before I share a few final thoughts, thanks to Matthew Riley for joining us tonight. Thanks to Matushka Trudy for engineering. Thanks to Simon for putting up the slides and the video. Thanks to Melissa for her work behind the scenes. So here's our Father Among the Saints, St. John Chrysostom, talking about why it's important to focus on the development and the care of our children. He writes, "In children, we have a great charge committed to us. Let us bestow great care upon them and do everything that the evil one may not rob us of them. But unfortunately now our practice is the reverse of this. We take care, indeed, to have our houses in order, to commit our finances to a faithful manager. We look for a good car," he says, a donkey driver and a muleteer and a bailiff, a clever accountant, right? All the things that we do to take care of ourselves. But he says, St. John Chrysostom says, we do not look out for what is much more important. For a person to whom we may commit our son and daughters as the guardian of his or her morals, though this is a possession much more valuable than all the others. It is for him and her, indeed, that we take such care of our estate, of our material goods. We take care of our possessions for our children. But of the children themselves, we take little care at all. Form the soul of thy son and daughter aright, and the rest will be added hereafter. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. And join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today Live. Good night, everybody. Last time, Christ is risen.